Great.
And welcome to Open Heart Surgery with Boots. Oh my gosh. We are coming up on the 2-year anniversary of when I even had this idea of starting a podcast for open heart surgery. And hilariously, I didn't even listen to podcasts. And it just kind of came to me like this existential nudge. And here I am 2 years later. And what you don't see is Michael Morey, who is my engineer in the background, who helps me edit these episodes. And I think I'm making his job easier because I'm saying less ums. So thank you for sticking with me all this time. And thank you for continuing to come back. Please do consider supporting this podcast on Patreon. You can find the links in the show notes. This is definitely not done for free. And I have been so happy and honored to keep this podcast going. But it does feel good when I see support coming from willing donors. And if you sign up for the second or third tier, then you get to be a part of the Zoom community, which I'm just now getting going. So be sure to go check that out. And you will absolutely make my year if you become a Patreon supporter. But oh my goodness, enough jabbering. Let's get to today's episode with Jeremy Rothenberg. Jeremy, welcome. You're coming to us from Ashland, Oregon, and I could not be more tickled to have you. And you are my, I think my second or third friend that I've made actually through Substack. So Substack for the win.
Nice.
Jeremy, will you please introduce yourself and kind of set the scene of like, who you are, what you're about. You have overcome an incredible story that I have never heard of before. So I'm even more excited about that. I mean, I'm not excited about what happened to you, but I'm excited to have your story on the podcast. But first, set the scene of who Jeremy Rothenberg is.
Thank you. So happy to be here and talk to you after listening to you for so long. Who I am an acupuncturist and Chinese herbalist, and I'm also a wellness coach. I sometimes call myself an executive wellness coach because I work with executives and creative professionals, and mostly in the tech industry, where once upon a time I used to work. And I live in Ashland, Oregon. Moved here about 6 years ago from Oakland, the Bay Area, in California, where I had an acupuncture practice for 10 years. And before that, did about 15 years doing various types of producing and product managing in the tech industry. Yeah, do you want me to go on from there, or?
Well, I just got to say, that's quite the pivot.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this all plays nicely in this whole story. Just very briefly on that, working in that world, I felt that I wasn't really doing what I was meant to be doing in life. Even though I liked it, it was fun, smart people, I was making a good amount of money. I always felt drained, and I always felt like I was losing energy rather than gaining energy. And at one point, I had an experience where I started having panic attacks after having my heart starting to skip a beat. One day, I'll just tell a quick story. One day I was working a small job as a favor for my cousin over the Christmas holiday, and I was QAing back then what was CD-ROMs, and it was such a repetitive job that I really wasn't that happy about doing, but I was doing it anyway, and I felt my heart started to skip beats, and it like threw me into a panic attack. Why? Because weeks before that, I had just come home from visiting my father on the East Coast after he had quintuple bypass surgery with Dr. Oz. And yes, it's that Dr. Oz.
What?
He was back then when he was still a top cardiac surgeon in New York before he became the character that you know him as. And my father had quintuple bypass surgery, which is I think as many as you can possibly have. And I had these skipped beats, and suddenly something came in my mind that something was wrong with my heart. And I had these panic attacks, which led to me working briefly with an energy healer who set me completely at ease, set my heart completely at ease. And I realized, you know what? Two things here. One, I have to learn to do what he did. And number two, I have to do what I know that I'm supposed to be doing in life, which is helping people and working directly with the mind and the body rather than on these interactive products that I was working on for in the tech industry. That was the beginning of this story, to be quite honest, because it will come back. We'll come back to understand that those immediate skipped beats were a result of something that led to the surgery that I had last year.
And I'm still stuck on Dr. Oz. I honestly
I know.
forgot.
He was actually a top surgeon, I believe,
Wow.
at Columbia Presbyterian in New York City. Yeah,
Okay. I'm gonna have to dig
yeah,
into that separately. He really okay. That's for another time.
yeah. It's just an interesting thing. Yeah.
So okay, you've set the scene, but like give us the big overarching picture of well, first of all, how old are you
So I'm
now?
55 years old
Okay.
now.
All
Yeah.
right. Way to go.
When I,
Well done.
when I thank you. When I had those, that was back in 2001 or
Okay.
2002 when I first started feeling these heart related um, symptoms that
Mhm.
I just I had those checked out, and they were checked out to be normal. They were called PVCs, premature ventricular contractions. People have them. It wasn't considered an issue. It was only looking back 20 years now that I realized that maybe they had something to do with this issue of my
Mhm.
pericardium,
Yeah.
which I can
Which
go
that's the
into,
great
obviously.
segue into giving us the big picture of, give us the 50,000-foot view, and then we're gonna go back and connect some dots and help the
Yeah.
listeners understand your process.
Yeah. So last year, well, in August of 2023, I was diagnosed with liver cirrhosis, which was as astonishing as it could possibly be because I didn't have any symptoms of liver cirrhosis. And I was only investigating my liver because a year before that, I started having atrial fibrillation. And atrial fibrillation is when the atrium of your heart start to beat wildly. And it's usually not a life-threatening situation, but it can cause blood clots, which can cause stroke. So there is concern about it. Um, I tripped into atrial fibrillation 2 weeks before my daughter's bat mitzvah in 2023, and didn't come out of it for 3 months because I live in a small town. I couldn't get to see a cardiologist for 3 months, and because I was in pretty good shape, I didn't. It didn't really affect me that much. The only reason why I knew that I had the atrial fibrillation is because my Apple Watch told me I did. It alerted me and said, you have atrial fibrillation. I started measuring everything, and I realized, oh, my resting heart rate is now 30 beats above what it was before. And when I exercise, everything goes about 30 beats higher than it did before. Um, so I eventually had to get a cardio version, which is a shock, like a defibrillator, but in a surgical environment. And I did that January 2024, and that's reset my heart rhythm. And that was great. And I talked to my cardiologist and I said, hey, many years ago, I was tested for life insurance. And they came back with the blood test and everything was normal except this one liver enzyme called GGT, which they normally don't test for. But when it's high, mine was kind of off the charts high. When it's high, it can signal that you might be an alcoholic or you might have some like bile duct issues. So the life insurance people they cut you out. And I was shocked about that. And I talked to doctors, any doctor I would see over the next bunch of years. So I would ask about that, and they all kind of shrug their shoulders. And they're like, well, if everything else is normal, your ALT, AST, the other liver enzymes, which are normally checked, they're normal. It's probably just who you are. You probably just have a weird GGT level. And so I went on with my life, didn't really think about it too much. But I asked my cardiologist at this point, I said, I have this high GGT thing. Could this have anything to do with my atrial fibrillation? And she said, well, she didn't know. She did some tests, but everything came back negative. She then sent me to a GI people. And I had coordinated my cardio version to be at the beginning of the year so that I could use up my deductible immediately so that I could, use my insurance that year as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so my deductible was up. I said, okay, I'll go do a bunch of lab tests. That's fine. And so I went to see a GI person, went through all these lab tests. Some of them started coming back a little off, had an ultrasound of the liver or of the abdomen, and that said, there were some blood flow issues in the liver. So we did something called a elastography ultrasound, which measures the flexibility and the density of an organ. So that was elastography, like elastic elastography.
Okay. I've never heard of that.
I hadn't either. and that came back saying, and that comes back with a scale of 0 to 4 for liver fibrosis, 4 being cirrhosis, liver cirrhosis. Mine came back at 4. And I remember, reading that result at my kitchen table and just my jaw dropping to the floor. This is weeks after a very, very close friend of mine died from cancer. And I was like, wow, my turn. And that was shocking, absolutely
What a
shocking.
roller coaster.
Because why would you have liver cirrhosis? I was not an alcoholic. I generally eat a, healthy, generally low carb diet. There's no way I had a fatty liver or anything like that. So we assumed that it must be like some kind of autoimmune disease. We checked for autoimmune hepatitis, anything under the sun. All of it came back a little inconclusive, but mostly negative. Interestingly, where I live, right, what I found out is you have a certain level of medical availability here, and then there's a certain level that you have to travel for. There are no hepatologists, which is a liver specialist, in the Rogue Valley where I live at all. So when I got this diagnosis, I remembered that a close friend of mine worked in liver transplant at UCSF in California and San Francisco. And so I contacted her. She quickly had me contact a hepatologist that she worked with. And I didn't have out-of-network insurance. I could only stay in Oregon. This woman, Dr. Lai, she is kind of my savior. She consulted with me for free. And she thought about it. She, looked at the results of everything that I had, and she said, this seems to be some kind of issue with blood flow. You really should have your heart checked for pressures. Could be something like constrictive pericarditis or something in that realm. And when she said that, a light bulb went off in my mind, because in 1990, 34 years ago now, I had a case of acute pericarditis, which meant that my pericardium, which is the sac that surrounds your heart and protects your heart, became inflamed, probably from a virus. We don't know. I was traveling. I was on a train in Spain, an overnight train in Spain I had been in Morocco. And while trying to sleep, my chest started to close down. My breathing started to get painful. And so I hopped off the bed and I walked back and forth in the train like I would do if I was, spinning from too much alcohol or something, and just try to bear down and get through it. But it just kept getting worse and worse. So we got off that train prematurely in Barcelona, went to a hospital. And that's where eventually they discovered that I had what they said was acute pericarditis. I'd never heard of that before. And they said they couldn't really do anything but give me ibuprofen and rest. And eventually left the hospital, went home to New York. I was so fatigued after that for a few weeks. It was really a monumental thing. I remember it very, very clearly. But after that, I forgot about it. Completely forgot about it. Didn't follow up with any doctors. I was 21 years old.
Mhm.
And so the rest of, of my life up until now, what probably happened was the inflammation and the response to the inflammation started to calcify the pericardium, harden it to what the surgeon would describe as bone level calcification.
No way.
And yeah, it's like breaking it off, like in literally cracking it off of my heart. Some of it was deeply intertwined with the heart muscle, and so that part couldn't come off.
So this is now we're talking about your open heart surgery.
That's right.
Yeah.
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 So she was like, I emailed her back and said, "Wow, I had this thing, acute pericarditis," and she responded to me. She was like, "Wow, I was even a little hesitant to say that to you because it was such an out there, kind of textbook diagnosis that you would do in a class or something like that. It's not something you really see in reality." And from there, there were a bunch of tests had to happen after that. We had all my care moved up to OHSU in Portland, where I had a catheterization to check the pressures in the heart. I had a heart MRI to really just make sure that this was what was going on. And the only treatment for it is surgery, which is called a pericardiectomy,
Okay. So
which
hang on
is
before we get to the pericardiectomy. When you did all those heart tests in Portland, did they all show that your heart needed some serious help?
they all showed exactly what she said, constrictive pericarditis. So what it is, if you think about it, it's just instead of that pericardium being flexible and when your heart beats, it moves with it, it's now hard. So your heart doesn't have as much space to open and close,
Okay,
right?
gotcha.
So what it does, what you see on a catheterization, from my understanding, is you see a certain pressure signal so that when the beat comes in and goes out, a normal thing would rise and fall in a particular way, and this would rise and fall in a different way. And they call that
Oh.
like a square root sign.
Mhm.
Did mine was textbook that very clearly that, and also the MRI very clearly showed this calcification. Also, years ago, because I have a lot of heart issues in my family, I had what's called a calcium test, which is a CT scan that everybody should actually have. It's very inexpensive. It's not covered by insurance, but it costs a couple $100, maybe $200 or $300, and it tells you about the calcification in your arteries, and it gives you a sense of like how dangerous your situation is, for heart disease in general. But the cardiologist who I met at OHSU in Portland showed me the pictures from that calcium test, which nobody had showed me the years before that I'd taken it. He said, "Yeah, there's some calcium in your arteries, but look at your pericardium. It was thickened, and the calcium was all in there." And nobody had ever said anything about that to me.
Was it in the report?
It said in the report, it said something like, yeah, pericardial calcifications. It didn't say it in any way that made it sound dangerous. That I think I had an echocardiogram 20 years ago that also came back with some pericardial calcification.
Mhm.
Nobody ever made a deal about it. I never thought about it
Yeah.
until now.
And
So all of the tests were very clear in suggesting this is what it was.
you're not the first person, and even myself, um, everyone I've had the honor and privilege of interviewing for this podcast, almost every single person, if they do read their report, the report is usually not sounding alarms. It's just reporting facts of what the radiologist sees. But then the cardiologist usually doesn't get excited or is overly incentivized to educate us on what is found in a radiology report. And so, what I always say, and I think you would agree here, it's don't take our doctor's word for it. Like, go back and read our own reports and then ask questions. Like, Dr. Google can get us into trouble and it can dysregulate us. So you need to be able to go and like research what these terms mean from like a grounded, calm nervous system. Because there can be things on Dr. Google that can be scary. So it's a fine line of educating ourselves, but then not overly educating and jump to the conclusion that we're going to die tomorrow.
Well, let me tell you about Dr. ChatGPT, because
Please.
what I did with all of my test results that came in is I fed them into this AI, ChatGPT, and it would come back with like all the very specific recommendations about what this could possibly be, right? So when you look things up on Google, obviously you get these very broad issues, right? You could be dying from this, that, and the other thing. ChatGPT like looks at the lab tests and say, well, these lab tests suggest that it could be this or it could be that, and then put more information and more information and more information. So it definitely helped me push my local GI to help me get a liver biopsy, which she was actually weirdly reticent to do, because it kept telling me, you might have cirrhosis, you might not. The elastography is not the last word on this. The gold standard is to get a piece of your liver, basically, and see what that says. And so we did that.
Fascinating.
The good news with that, just by the way, is that came back a step lower than cirrhosis. That came back saying I had maybe like level 3 as opposed to 4, which is still bad, but not really on the edge of liver failure, which I thought it might be for a few weeks.
Right. Wow. Well, thanks for connecting the dots. And so
Yeah.
bring us to the day of heart surgery. Like, this is just amazing. So
Yeah.
here
So
you
all
are
of
in
this happened.
Portland.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I drove back. Portland's about 4.5-hour drive from where I live. I went up and back to Portland probably 6 times in, a few months to meet first with the cardiologist, then with the surgeon, then with the surgeon again. I was a little afraid to have the surgery at OHSU because pericardiectomies are very rare, or somewhat rare. So even at a place like OHSU where they do heart transplants, they only do a handful of pericardiectomies a year. So I was I was talking to the Mayo Clinic, I was talking to the Cleveland Clinic. These places do them on a regular basis. This would require me to get different insurance. So I was going to have to wait till after the beginning of the year. After my catheterization, which was in November, they called me somewhere around Thanksgiving and said, surgery, we're scheduling you for surgery on the 12th of December, which was like 2 weeks away, a little more than 2 weeks away. And I had been investigating these other paths. So I was a little nervous, but on the way for my last consult with Dr. Tabayan, who was my surgeon, I talked to another doctor, Dr. Greason at the Mayo Clinic, who is like one of the foremost surgeons for this type of surgery in the country. And he was very kind, very generous with his time, and led me to understand, after peppering him with as many questions as I could, that I was going to be okay at OHSU with this doctor. Then that was just a week before the surgery. I met with that doctor again, asked him a few more questions, and then we were a go for surgery. The same year that I had the cardio version to start with. Luckily for me, this, from an insurance point of view, I had already reached my out-of-pocket maximum. The surgery was now going to be paid for. And then it was just preparing for surgery. And I had already been doing that a bit by listening to your podcast, which I found extremely helpful to listen to other people's stories, your story, and understand how people prepare and what could happen afterwards. Some of which on your story was concerning, and the wires is what comes to mind, having to have those taken out. And then I also downloaded these on the request of my stepmother, who was with my father at that Dr. Oz surgery. She told me about these guided meditations. I'll have to look up that woman's name. But I did these guided meditations about the week or two before the surgery, which just were all about getting the nervous system to relax, to trust the surgery and the surgical team. Her name is Bella Ruth
Oh, yep, I use Bella Ruth Naprostek as well. Quite the name.
Yeah. Those were really profound. For some people, it might be a little new agey sounding, it's very soothing kind of thing. But I found that to be quite remarkable. I went into the surgery as calm as I could possibly be. I really had, I surrendered to the whole thing, which is a practice that I work with people on in my own coaching practice, which is radical acceptance, and surrender, which is just recognizing this is happening now. I can either resist it, and suffer, or I can let go into it and, let my body handle it. Yeah. So that led up to the 12th of December in 2023, which is, I had a 7-hour surgery, and I was on the
7
bypass.
hours?
Yeah, they got to go in there and scrape this thing off piece by piece all around your heart, and
You know what
getting to the
I'm
back of the
envisioning
heart.
right now is like a raw egg, and the surgeon's trying to chip away at just the shell because you say it was
That's right.
so calcified, and then the yolk is your heart. Oh,
That's
God.
exactly it. So on the heart-lung bypass machine, the heart stops, so it's easier to do that. But obviously, there's dangers from being on the heart bypass machine, and that was some of the stuff I was very concerned about, because there's post-surgical issues with cognitive.
Pump head. They call it pump head.
Okay, yeah. So I was afraid of all of that, but it went off without a hitch, I guess, and here I am, obviously, to tell the story.
Dude. 7 hours. I think
7
that's
hours.
your, besides my dad, my dad's quintuple bypass was 8 hours. And I think you're now you win number 2 for as really long heart surgeries. Jeez.
I know.
I'm just taking a minute to take all that in, because I have so many questions, but it's just a lot to take in. Thank you to your liver for letting us know that you needed help.
For sure.
And thank you to that amazing hepatologist that helped you connect the dots. And thank you to you, who was incessant in asking questions and not accepting, these answers that didn't resonate with you. And I think that's a really big, I'm taking so much away from our conversation today already, but that just continues to drive home for me, and hopefully those listening, that like our intuitions are everything. We are in the driver's seat of our healthcare, and if something doesn't feel right, we have the right to continue to pursue other avenues, and that's what you did, thankfully.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And from this experience, I recognized the dislocated nature of our healthcare system. Unless you're in like a managed care facility of some kind, like Kaiser back in California, you have to make some leaps sometimes between, your local person and a specialist, and then maybe, a distant hospital. That's on you, basically. they'll make a referral, but that will just get lost a lot of times. And so pushing through the medical system gently but firmly, and calling back and calling back and calling back, and you think you might be bothering people, but they're busy and they need to realize that you need help, and you could slip through their cracks. And it's really, really important. I would just, for anybody listening, to push pretty hard when you know that you need something.
Yes, and I had to do the same, and I it's, I'm having flashbacks of how tiring it was to pick up the phone when my heart had hardly any juice left. I mean, it was so under oxygenated, and here I'm still having to pound the pavement. Um, and it was interesting, and it doesn't seem like you had this mindset, but I had to really tune out my loved ones who said, just be patient, wait, let them come to you. And I was like, no, I can tell I don't have much time left. And it's hard to find the courage, but you have to tune out what we've kind of been conditioned to believe, that we aren't allowed to be in the driver's seat, that we aren't allowed to be the squeaky wheel. But you're right. I mean, especially in today's healthcare system post COVID, yeah, everyone's tired, everything's understaffed. So it really is on us to to be in the driver's seat and get us to where we need to go. So,
And there's a difference between being a hypochondriac and not knowing what you really need and not knowing what's going on. But when you know that you have something going on, you need the help, driving towards that help is everything.
yes, yes. So, in the moments we have left, we you're obviously, you made it through your surgery. And what date was your surgery?
It was December 23,
Okay.
and then
Um
it was about six weeks later, driving up to OHSU to meet with the cardiologist, is when I decided that I would start training for the Mount Ashland Hill Climb, this half marathon up a mile from my town to the top of Mount Ashland, because nobody called me from cardiac, physical therapy or whatever they call that. I forget.
Cardiac
A bunch of
rehab.
time. Cardiac rehab. We tried a bunch of times to get in touch with them, and I just couldn't. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do my own cardiac rehab, and I'm going to do this thing because I don't know if I'll ever be able to do it again if I don't do it now.
Mhm.
And that started this sensation and the feeling of time and life being very, very precious, and to really decide what you want to do, what I want to do, and not let fear and disbelief get in the way of me doing things. So I started training for this thing that I would do 6 months after surgery, which I didn't know if I could actually do or would actually make it. But I started running in the dark and the cold in February, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, I would go out to a track and walk around, halfway around, stop or whatever, and eventually maybe jog around a little bit, eventually week by week, day by day, working up to this big summiting of this mountain in 4 hours from the bottom, from our town to the top of this mountain. It was quite the experience.
And so you did it. You did the half marathon.
I did that, yeah, January. Uh, on June 8th, which was my daughter's birthday. She wasn't happy about that at all, but she met me at the top and did the last mile, which is the steepest mile up the ski mountain of Mount Ashland. And yeah, I did that, and I'm continuing to run, and I get up in the morning still. Now it's getting dark again, running in the dark. And that was one of the things I could never do before the surgery, that I didn't know why. I could never run long distances. And now I can do 4, 8, 10, 12 miles without thinking about it too much.
A whole new lease on life. It's like your heart has so much room now. It's just like, yes.
It's totally, and I really felt that for a while. Really, and I can still feel like I can most of the time feel my heart beating into my chest just because it has so much room now to
Golly.
expand. Yeah.
How has this changed you spiritually?
Well, it has definitely given me this sense of of the preciousness of life. Right? It's really just I had I worked on this myself in the past. I think about death maybe more than the average person. I work in healthcare. My friend died of cancer last year. So it has brought me even more into the present moment. And it's as though I feel like a demand on my system, for whatever it is that wants to be expressed as me through me in this life is much clearer and definitely feels demanding about it. So it's there's more of me that I'm getting out of the way and allowing this to come through as clearly as possible.
So it's like this open heart surgery has brought clarity.
It opened my heart, in a certain way. My heart was always the guiding source for me. When I had those skip beats, 25 years ago or whatever, and um, always feeling into my heart to try to understand what it is that I want. And my heart was constricted, literally constricted. Right. And so what was that doing to me psychologically? What was that doing to me spiritually? It's hard to exactly say, but there's definitely this sense of unburdenedness and openness and possibility. And like I said, there's this kind of sense that everything that I've thought about wanting to do, or whether it's with work or with life or community, like I gotta do because there's not infinite amount of time here.
What's one piece of advice you want to give to heart patients coming after you?
Well, I would definitely say, bottom line is we should all be regulating our nervous systems, really, really understanding and working with this part of us that is deciding for us, really, whether we're safe or whether we're in danger, and trying to get past a lot of what we experience as danger, which really isn't, and then being able over time with some regulation, with some strengthening, to be able to actually deal with the actual danger when it comes, right? So that you don't overdo it. Most people, I notice, are overreacting in their lives to the just incredible amount of stimulus coming into our systems every single day, all the information, all the issues around politics or world issues and wars, and down to our bank accounts and paying rent and dealing with our loved ones, right? All of this stuff creates this sense that we're in danger, and our nervous systems are hyped up too often for too long. And so getting ourselves to relax, to learn how to breathe properly, to strengthen our bodies, and to be able to root in a sense of peace and ease will help any of us not become heart patients, number one. And then if you are a heart patient, help soothe and heal. And when we relax, when we get that nervous system to relax, that's when our body repairs itself, and our body and mind can connect and rejuvenate.
Beautiful. And how do we find you? How can listeners find you? Because you help people with this.
Yeah, so I work directly with people on this. You can go directly to my website, jeremyrothenberg.com. I also have a channel on Insight Timer. I teach meditation, lead meditations. So I think that's insighttimer.com/Jeremy Rothenberg. And we can include, I guess, links
Yep.
on
I'll
the.
have all that in the show notes for listeners.
Great. Yeah. So
Mhm.
I offer people free coaching sessions when they're available. And we can, have a 30-minute talk about what's going on for you, and give you some free coaching and see what's available for you.
Wow. Incredible. And I hope listeners will take you up on that, because you are just an absolute joy to speak with. And I
Oh,
so
thank you.
appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and be seen, be heard, and share your story, because none of us have to go through this alone. And I know that your story of hope, inspiration, and healing will help many others. So thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much. It's great talking to you. I really enjoyed it.
And you've heard it here. You will find Jeremy Rothenberg in the show notes. Please do consider reaching out to him. And if you have never used Insight Timer, I love it. It is such a great tool. And there are so many different like options on there to listen to Jeremy. They have just like singing bowls and all, I don't know. It's like all kinds of bells and whistles that can help us through kind of the interesting time we find ourselves in here on planet Earth. So, thank you so much for joining us today with Open Heart Surgery with Boots. Please be sure to come back next week. I've got another episode queued up for you. I know you're going to love it. Until then, I love you. Your heart is your best friend.